Hello and welcome to 3.9 and 3.10. We're going to be talking about linear functions and then relations. So this is just kind of a continuation of what we started the other day in 3.8. So to start off with, we just want to touch base and make sure that we're all on the same page. Okay, so a linear function is a function f that can be defined as f of x equals mx plus b, right, where x, m, and b are any real numbers. And then the graph is that y equals mx plus b, with m is your slope and y is your b-intercept. So this is one of those things, right, where we have done a lot of this in the past, right? Y equals mx plus b, y equals mx plus b, m is my slope, right? B is my y-intercept. Like we do this over and over and over again. So this is just really looking at it from a different perspective, but in reality, it's the same basic idea. Okay, a constant function occurs when your slope is 0. So if your slope is 0, you get a y equals line, which is always horizontal, and that's known as a constant function. Okay, so if you don't remember, your slope is just representing the change in y over the change in x, or the change in f of x over x, which is really just rise over run. Okay, and our formula, right, is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So this is something you guys have done before, but we're just going to spend some time going back over it to make sure that you guys remember how to do this. Okay, so remember, this is really just x and y. So this is really the point 2, 7. So this is when I put into my output was 7. So your input, output, x, y with a slope of 4. So that means in my equation, y equals mx plus b, I have an y, an m, and an x, so then I can solve for my b. So I just put in those values. 7 equals m times x plus b. Oh, forgot to put in my m value, right? They tell us m is 4. So 7 equals 4 times 2 plus b. So 7 equals 8 plus b. Subtract 8 from both sides, and that gives us b equals a -1. So my answer, right, says give the linear function the form f of x equals mx plus b. So my f of x equals, we're given our slope is 4. So this is going to be 4x, and then our y-intercept is b, so -1. Okay, on to the next problem. Okay, they give us 2 points. Okay, so you can find your slope that way, or you can notice, right, that this is your y-intercept, right? 0, 3 is your y-intercept, and then 4, 13 is another point on the graph. So since you know that this is your y-intercept, you know that this has to be b. So now you have an x and a y you can put in along with the b, and you can say 13 equals m times x plus b. So you can subtract 3 from both sides, and you get 10 equals 4 times m. Divide both sides by 4, and you get m equals 10 over 4, which is 5 over 2. So your equation is f of x equals m x plus b, which is 3. Now, the other way you can do that, if you don't want to do it this way, is find your slope. So do your 13 minus 3 over 4 minus 0, which will give you the 10 over 4, which gives you the 5 over 2. Now you recognize that this is b, this is m, and you could go immediately to here. So you can do it either way. You can solve for the slope this way, or you can do it that way, whichever way you would rather do it. Okay, number 3 is another example. This time, they don't give you the y-intercept or the slope, so you have to find both pieces. So remember, this is the same as 3, 2. This is 12, 4. So now we need to do y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, and that gives me 2 over 9. Okay, once we have this 2 over 9 for our slope. We then need to put that back in to solve for b. So it doesn't matter. I can either pick the first point or the second point. Remember, this is your x and your y. So 2 equals 3 times 2/9 plus b. So 2 equals 3 times 2 is 6, so 6/9 plus b. 2 equals 2/3 plus b. So then if I subtract 2/3 from both sides, that gives me 1 1/3 equals b. Now you could also leave that as 4/3. Either one is acceptable. I don't really care which way you prefer. So then we have a slope, right, was 2 over 9, and we have our b value as 4/3 or 1 1/3. So f of x equals 2/9 x plus 4/3. All right, so now if we flip over to the back side, it says at noon a pump started emptying an oil storage tank at a constant rate. At 2 p.m., there were 1,680 barrels left in the tank. At 5 p.m., there were 600 barrels left. All right, so if they started at noon and we're looking at 2 p.m., then that means there are that many barrels. That means at 2 hours in, we have 1,680 barrels. At 5 p.m., so at 5 hours in, we have 600 barrels. So 5 p.m., we have 600 barrels. So it says write a linear function to describe the situation. So if we have 2 points, we can write that linear function. Right? So we can just find our slope and our y-intercept. So 600 minus 1680 over 5 minus 2. So if you do 600 minus 1680, right, that gives you a negative 1080. And then divided by 3 is 360. So this is a negative 360 is my slope. Now, right, this makes sense that it's negative. Anytime you're doing one of these problems, you should always ask yourself, does my answer make sense? Well, if we're taking oil out of a barrel, then it would make sense that it's negative slope for how much oil is left in the barrel because it's coming out. So now I just put it back into any one of these to find b. So y equals m times x plus b. So then if I do negative 360 times 2, it gives me a negative 720 plus b. So then if I add 720 to both sides, that tells me how many gallons I started off with. So I started off 0, 0, carry the 1 with 2,400 gallons. So now that gives me the equation for the function, because this is my b value. So now I can say f of x equals a negative 360x plus 2,400. So this is A. Then for B, it says how many barrels were in the tank at noon. So that's your starting rate. So if I put in a time of 0, right, my starting amount, that cancels it out, and I'm just left with my y-intercept. So there were 2,400 barrels when we started out. And then C says, at what time will the tank be empty? So we want to know when this equals 0. So we have to say, right, we put in 0 for our output because that's the answer we want, equals negative 360x plus 2,400. So if we subtract 2,400 from both sides, we get negative 2,400 equals negative 360x. So we divide both sides by a negative 360. So 2,400 divided by 360. This gives me 6 2/3 Okay, if I write that as a mixed number, so it's 6 2/3, so 2/3 of an hour. So if you do 2/3 times 60, that gives me 40. So it takes 6 hours and 40 minutes to empty that barrel out. So since we started at noon, at what time will the tank be empty? Well, at 6:40 p.m., that tank will be empty. Now, as we move on to relations, we talked a little bit the other day about the fact that a relation does not have the same stipulations as what a function does. And we even talked a little bit about the vertical line test. So we're just going to revisit that. Right? So as we talked about the other day, right, the relation is just the relationship in the set of the ordered pairs, right? So it doesn't matter if you have an x value going to multiple y values. That's acceptable. Okay, the domain is still the x values of your ordered pairs. Your range is still the second coordinate or the y values in your standard xy point form. So the function, right, is only when for every x there is only one y, whereas a relation you can go to multiple y values. And as we talked the other day, the vertical line test is kind of the visual representation of how to know that something is not a function, right? If I draw a vertical line anywhere on that graph and it's going to hit more than one point, that tells me that it's not a function, it's only a relation. So when we look at these problems here, right, just looking at these points, we can tell whether this represents a function or just a relation, right? Because if we have one x value that goes to more than one y value, that means it can only be a relation. So if we look at these relations here, we have 2, 1, 1, negative 2, and 1, 2. Well, right here we have this x value right here that goes both to 2 and to negative 2. So since we have the same x going to different y's, that means that this is not a function, it is just a relation. So this is not a function. Okay, just a relation. Now in the second one, we have 3 going to 1, we have 1 going to 2, we have negative 1 going to negative 1. We don't even have a repeated x value. Because we don't have a repeated x value, that means that we automatically know that this can be a function, because that means that it is not repeating an x going to a different y. Your homework assignment is posted. Here are copies of those, this is also the problems in the book if you would like to work out of your book. If you have any questions, please make sure that you get a hold of me. Have a great day, guys.